Hi everybody, welcome. This is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today, for this week's show, we're going to catch up on some of the games that have been submitted in the Ask Dennis to Look at Your Game thread. So there's about 11 games, and I'm not going to go through all of them by any means, but we'll take a look at a good chunk of them. Okay, so the first one, and some of them we'll look at the whole game or large portions of the game. In others, the people just had questions about this or that particular point, or there just are a few points of special interest. So we'll be able to get through quite a bit of this. All right, so the first game is submitted by Pogo, and it's a game he was black in against Boy Howdy. So this is, I assume, some online blitz. So the first question that black asks is about this, F4 on move 2 against the French. And it's been played, and in fact, I've seen it recommended someplace recently. I can't remember where. Well, okay, I wouldn't say recommended, but just suggested, offered as a possibility, something of interest. But really, at best, it'll transpose into some normal kinds of French variations. But it's not always clear for white that rushing to play F4 is such a good thing. So we'll see what this looks like. Okay, so D5, perfectly good move. E5, C5. And, okay, here I think white has a basic choice, either to play d4 or not play d4. So there's an old game between Weiss, if you want to say it that way, and Marozzi from Budapest in 1895. So this is cutting-edge theory here. And it continued knight f3, knight c6, c3, and then black played d4, which is quite interesting. It gives up some light squares. So, you can see c4 and e4 might be usable for white at some moment. But this pawn on d4 is quite strong and really kind of clamps down on the white position. So after d3, knight h6, black might even be a touch better here. So certainly this position is more comfortable. But black can also play in a more classically French way with knight h6, and then on d4, queen to b6. And the idea is that black is going to take on d4, play knight f5, and white's center, though it looks strong because it's far advanced, is really rather brittle, and it's hard for white to actually do anything in that position. And black, for his part, will have very easy play with moves like bishop d7, rook c8, and then trying to utilize the c file. Okay. So in the game, white played d4, and okay, here black could take. Here, an old idea is for white not to recapture the pawn, as in basically ever, but to play knight f3, knight c6, a3, and then play bishop d6, and so on. But against this, it looks like plans where black plays for quick f6 should be quite good. Black can get adequate pressure against white's center and not allow him to build up. But this idea here is one of Nimzovich's. I don't remember if he used f4 as part of it, but basically this idea of sacking the d-pawn, a3, bishop to d3, and so on. But it's really not very serious. Okay, but nothing wrong with Pogo's knight c6. Okay, now if knight f3, again we can take, or we could play queen b6, or we could play knight h6 with, again, similar ideas. Alright, so after knight c6, white played c3, queen b6, perfectly good, knight f3. And then, okay, here we kind of lose the thread a little bit for both players. Black played knight g to e7, and then here white should have played d takes c5. So sometimes it's actually good to kind of clear the center here. White will be able to put the bishop on e3 with a little bit of preparation. So bishop d3, queen e2, and then bishop to e3. And in fact, then white can even have some prospects for an edge. So black should have played here knight to h6. So that way dc is met by bishop takes c5. And on bishop d3, takes and takes. Okay, quick question. Can black safely take the pawn on d4? Okay, hopefully everyone realizes that the answer to that is a resounding no, because if you take, white takes, black takes, and then bishop to b5 is check, and white will take the queen on d4. So that's a non-starter there. Do not fall for that trap. Well known, very old, and very bad for black, obviously. Okay, so the right move is bishop to d7 here, and I think black has an edge in this position. I mean, white's d-pawn is a bit sensitive, and really white doesn't have any promising way to whip up some kind of attack on the king's side or anywhere else for that matter. All right, so there's one more question that black had in the game, so we'll get to that point. And here white blunders with bishop to e3, takes, queen to b3. And then here, what Pogo wanted to know is basically what's my opinion on queen takes a1 versus queen takes b3. Now, there are very specific factors in the position. So first of all, the best move is just queen takes g2, so it's none of the above. White plays rook f1, and black is up 2 pawns for more or less nothing. Okay. Now, also queen takes a1 is strong because the continuation in the game wasn't forced. So after castles, instead of c4, and then it went queen c2, bishop here, knight here, takes and takes. Okay, so this is really what we can say is the position that Pogo has in mind when he's asking the question. So how does this compare to the position after queen b3, queen takes, pawn takes? And really I would say it's just a matter of choice. Now, if you feel like you're a safe pawn up here, and I kind of feel that way about black's position. I mean, white has some chances for counterplay, but basically black is up a pawn, if not for nothing, then for insufficient counterplay. Whereas here, okay, after knight takes f1, black has 2 rooks and a pawn for a queen. Okay. Also, bishop for knight, but in this position, that isn't really advantageous. So, both positions I think favor black slightly. As a general rule, I would prefer the position where if I'm the strong side, I want the material to be the same kind of material. So in other words, I prefer, again, all things being equal, the pawn up situation, because it's harder, again, all things being equal, for the side that's down material to make anything happen. There's no real imbalance. He's just a pawn down and has to suffer. Whereas when the material is a little bit unclear, then you get some extra chances in the position. So that would be my vote as a general rule, but of course the general rule doesn't always apply. And in fact here, it was correct. Well, queen takes g2 might be best, but other than that, queen takes rook is right, because after castles, black can play knight a5, and the queen gets out. So, for instance, queen to b5, bishop d7 takes, queen b2, out we go with an easy win. Okay, so don't need to look at the rest of the game. Those of you who are interested can find it in the question thread. Okay, on to the next one. This was a game played between Kay Anderson and a player who remains anonymous. All right, so there are a few interesting moments early on in the game, and then a couple later. All right, so the player who submitted it is white. Okay, black plays a6, which is kind of unusual. So can we exploit this? Well, it's not so clear. I mean, knight c3, after d6, we're back into a regular variation. So we're well on our way to transposing. So a6, really the problem with a6, not that it's a bad move, but that it's not really the most flexible choice, because there are some variations of the Sicilian where a6 is certainly very useful, but others where it may not be useful, and others where the timing might be important. So it's let's say a premature commitment. Okay, so I think white can play knight c3, which would be a normal move, or it could play c4 and just try to say, okay, I've got the Monokroussos bind now, and this should be favorable. Okay, so we've got 2 straight games where there's a Monokroussos mention. Okay, instead white played bishop to c4, which is a little bit, I think, maybe not dubious, but also slightly strange, because black could choose a line with e6 where he doesn't play d6, and it might not be clear that the bishop is so beautifully placed on that diagonal as long as e6 is well covered. So it's probably okay. I mean, I can't really see it as a bad move, but again, it's just not the most flexible choice. I mean, sometimes bishop c4 is very good, sometimes it's neutral, and sometimes it's less than neutral, and it isn't really clear yet what it's going to be given this position. Okay, black played knight f6. I probably would have preferred e6, but okay, this is fine. I mean, I don't know. And now, though, white could have played a cute little move. So f3, I think, is kind of somewhat poor, frankly. Not a full-fledged mistake, maybe, certainly not a blunder, but I don't really like the weakness of the dark squares that this generates. So instead, knight to c3 is fine. Now maybe white rejected this out of some worry about something like b5, b4, and then knight takes e4. So think about this for a moment and try to figure out if this is really a threat or not. Okay? So is b5, b4 a threat for white to worry about? Well, it's black to move here. So can black play b5, b4 and win a pawn? The answer is a resounding no, because after b5, white has knight takes c6. Now, black can play queen c7 and just be, at least have a worse position, but maybe not completely lost. But that's nothing to be happy about. I think white can just play knight takes e7 there. But even worse is d takes c6 on account of bishop f7, which wins the queen. So king takes, and then queen takes queen. So f3 was just unnecessary. Okay, e5. All right, this is kind of double-edged. It gives up the hole on the d5 square, but it's not maybe so easy for white to take maximum advantage of this. So one approach would be knight f5 to maybe play bishop g5 and swing the knight back to e3. And if white can execute that, then white can definitely have some advantage. But black has this typical thrust d5, after which the position is easily equal. So black has no real worries here at all. Okay, so white chose knight e2, bishop c5, bishop g5, h6. Here, okay, bishop to h4 is played in the game, and that's all right. I think bishop f6 followed by knight b to c3 would also be quite logical. It's very typical in these kinds of structures. White is often very happy to swap off his dark squared bishop for a knight to increase his control over the d5 square. Of course, we'd be happier to do this with a pawn back on f2, assuming we're not getting mated. But white can castle queenside, so it's not that serious that this bishop is on c5. All right, at any rate, bishop to h4 is fine. Okay, black played the very committal g5, and I think probably bad. g5, bishop g3, b5, here, castles. Okay, and then here I think just a move like d6 would be sane, and it's roughly equal. Maybe white's a little bit better. I mean, I would prefer white, I think, as long as, again, this bishop, the black's dark squared bishop doesn't terrorize me too much, then I'm okay. But black played knight h5, and I think this is just an outright error, positionally speaking. It doesn't develop, it doesn't help to achieve any new plan, it weakens the control over the d5 square. Certainly knight takes g3 would be an atrocious move. Either recapture for white would be fantastic. And black's plan of playing knight f4 really isn't that good either. Okay, now here, a couple of moves. Okay, white played knight to d5, which is okay. It's not bad, but I think even better would have been queen to d2, preparing castling. Or maybe even bishop to f2. Slightly funny-looking move, but we want to reduce the powerful. Well, we want to reduce black's control of the dark squares and get rid of this extremely powerful bishop on c5. And notice, of course, that white's bishop on g3 really isn't doing anything. I mean, it's not like this is the jewel of the Nile that must be preserved at all costs. So bishop f2 is fine. Oops. And, okay, the fact that we're losing castling privileges really isn't very serious because white will castle by hand without much difficulty. So, just a possibility. All right, so knight to d5, knight f4, takes, queen d2. It's a good move. Queen a5, c3, also good, not allowing the trade of queens. d6, and now h4. And now all of these kingside pawn pushes of blacks are going to come home to roost in a big way, or at least they should have. So Anderson plays very well for the next few moves, but then drops the ball a bit. Okay, so takes. Now a very good move again by Anderson. Knight takes f4, queen to d8. And here the move he played was good enough to maintain a decisive advantage. I mean, he's up a pawn with a better position. But after knight h5, takes, rook c8, black more or less consolidated. I mean, he's going to be worse more or less forever, but at least the game goes on. So what should white have played? So this is kind of nice. I was happy that it came to mind fairly easily without the computer's help. So knight e6, fe6, and now knight c7. And black's army is just desperately overloaded. So we're threatening knight takes a8, we're threatening knight takes e6, and if queen takes c7, black just gets mated. If he doesn't take, then he just loses tons of material, but this is a forced mate. That's mate right there. Or if rook f7, again check, and then rook h8 ends the game. Okay, so this would have been a very nice finish and a suitable punishment really for black for all the liberties that he took in the opening. However, white played knight h5 and later on made further inaccuracies. Okay, and so now we reach this position here. Now, material is even. White is certainly much better. I mean, black's bishop is of only defensive value, and white can work around it or try to work around it. I mean, one thing you can try to do for white is to maneuver the knight to c4, so maybe something like knight f4, knight d5, check, and then either go to b6 or e3. And it also depends on what black's king does. I mean, black has to not let white's king come circling around as well. So I don't know if this is a win or not. I didn't work on it, but certainly it doesn't. At one level, it doesn't really matter. There's a certain way to handle this position with white, and if black can draw, okay, it's a draw. But there are certain things that you do and don't do in these endings to try to win them. And whatever the result is, well, it is what it is. But you can try as long as you like. Okay. Well, white played e5, and now we have a critical question for black. Should he trade the pawns? Should he trade everything? Or and if he doesn't, should he play d5? Or maybe can he wait? Maybe play something like king to d7. So think about this for a minute or two, or however long you need, and figure out the answer. All right. Well, the best move here is simply to take twice. So you play d takes e5 or bishop takes e5, and you take again. And it's critical to see that although white can win a pawn, the resulting ending is going to be a draw. So here or anywhere in the next couple of moves, black needs to play a4. So a4 here. You can even play king c7, king c5, and then a4. That'll work too. So anyway, a4. Now, of course, b takes a4 is just an immediate draw. It doesn't matter. Black can win the b pawn and will win the b pawn, but white can have as many a pawns as he likes. It doesn't matter as long as black's king can reach the corner. It's a dead draw, and of course black's king does reach the corner. So king c5 is the critical move, relatively speaking, but this isn't very difficult either. So a takes b3, a takes b3, king c7. And okay, I mean, the only thing that white can do to try to be trappy, alright, well, king b4, king b6 is a draw. So if we want to be mildly trappy, we could try something like king to c4. And now, okay, if king to b6, this would be a horrible blunder, because now white gets the opposition and wins. But any other move, well, not any other move, but king c6 or king b7 both draw. So king c6. And the important thing is just to get to this position with white to move. And it's a draw. So that's what black should have played. Instead, white caught a break when black played d5. Is it a win? I think so now, but again, it doesn't really matter. It's just that it allows white to keep torturing black forever. So here, best is just knight to f4. So we're just going to win the pawn. Black can't protect it, except by pushing it. But then king to e4, followed by knight e2, and then knight takes d4. And that'll be a win. So with the extra pawn and the good knight versus crummy bishop, it's a win for white. So in the game, black played e6, white played e6, king d6, knight f4, and then here black had to try d4, and now it's less clear that it's a win because he can't just play king e4 and knight e2 without dropping the e6 pawn. So this was black's last chance. I don't know if it's, again, I don't know, I don't really care if it's a win or not. I mean, it can be figured out, I think, fairly easily, but the point is white's better, and it's just a matter of how it'll all come out in the end. Instead, though, black played bishop to d4, trying to keep everything under control and not give away the e4 square. But there's a problem with this move. What is it? Do you see it? simply knight takes d5. The black king is overloaded. It's got to protect the pawn, but it also has to prevent white from queening. So white took the pawn and went on to win easily. All right, so on to the next game. Okay, and this is the game between Ivanov and Johannesson, and I think I may actually do a show on this game later on, just for fun, but it's not worth trying to do it superficially, so we'll perhaps come back to that another time. Okay, then next is a game between G Monster and Tokyo Tim, and okay, we won't look at this one either. G Monster, who won the game, felt like annotating it already, so nothing for me to do. Okay, and I'm saying that kind of somewhat facetiously, but generally speaking, if you're going to submit a vanity game, I'm probably not going to cover it. I mean, unless it's a really extraordinary game. So vanity games, they're fine, they're nice, but people can replay them themselves. So it's more that I'm trying to be instructive with the games and not just provide a forum for showing off. Though, again, if the showing off is really, really good, then yeah, I'll cover it. Okay, so the next game is a game between King Alpha and Wiss, and submitted by Black. Okay, so this was a Bogo Indian. And then here Black made a slightly peculiar move, but maybe it's not so bad. Normal approach is something like this. Queen e7, and then d6, then e5. And Black engages in this blocking strategy, putting all the pawns on dark squares, keeping control over c5, and then sometimes even playing, well, okay, Black has a choice here. Okay, you can play something like knight to c5, again, maintaining this blockading approach, or can even play c6, which is pretty interesting, with the idea of just taking. And if White recaptures the c pawn and the c file comes open, Black can use that, and also the bishop can go to a6 and enjoy this diagonal, maybe exchange itself for the knight. On the other hand, if White takes with the e pawn, let me get rid of all this stuff here. If after c takes d5, e takes d5, well, then Black can have a kingside majority, maybe go for f5, or in some cases, let's say play knight c5 and try to bounce the bishop around this way. So it's a very interesting setup. All right, instead, though, Black played knight to c6, so it's a little bit unusual. All right, now here, knight to e5 looks pretty natural. Maybe White has some very small edge here. It's hard to say. In the game, White played e5, and then here, I think d6, again followed by e5 would be kind of normal, but d5 was interesting too. So, continue takes, e5, knight e4. And, all right, now we just have a long series of errors from both sides. So something normal here would be, I think, like rook e1, trying to oust it, then maybe f5 could be very sharp, or knight to b4, aiming to put the knight on d3, so queen to b3 then. And, okay, it's just these positions are all playable. Another interesting move is rook to c1, trying to maybe put a little pressure on the file there. All right, in the game, though, White plays knight takes e4, which just gives away a pawn. So de, knight d2 would be better, but he played knight e1, so takes, and now, okay, just a series of blunders. Rook c1. Okay, you have 2 seconds to see why this is a blunder. The answer, of course, is knight e2 check, but Black missed it, played c5. White missed it, Black missed it. White either saw it or just played rook f to e1 because it's a good move. Okay, now here Black should play knight f3 check, just swap off, keep the extra pawn, but played rook f to e8. Okay, so now White can just keep taking things, and then this is equal, but instead played bishop takes e4, which is also a tactical error. So takes. Now here Black missed a chance to win a pawn. Do you see it? Rook takes e5. And then we have this fork, and we regain the pawn. Up a clear pawn, objectively probably should be a winning endgame. All right, instead, Black played h6. And now instead of being a pawn up, he should be a pawn down. So just keep taking things. Take, and take, and take. And White's up a pawn for nothing. Very good winning chances. So instead, White played f4. And then all of a sudden we're in this equal ending. Okay, now rook to d2 makes things kind of interesting, though. All right, so after king to e7, now we have a critical position. should white trade rooks or not? And, work this out with variations. Don't just come up with a yes or no answer. Okay, I think the answer is that white actually should trade rooks, and the game should end up as a draw. So takes, and now you have to be careful. If you play king to e2, I believe white's just going to lose this. So king e6, the black king goes to d5. At some moment, I think white will run out of pawn moves first. And the problem for white, okay, so let's say in a position like this, king d3, king d5, is that if he ever pushes this pawn, black just wins with g5. So the e-pawn will drop. And the problem for white is that because he can't even push the g-pawn, he's definitely going to run out of tempo moves first, after which black will play king to e4, and then play g5 and win. Okay, so after c takes d4, white plays f5. So we keep the king out, or make him have to take a long way around. So here, and now e6. And this, I think it should be a draw. It's, yeah, I mean, for one thing, okay, black could just put pawns on a6 and g6 and just go back and forth, because all the entry squares are covered. So this should be a draw. All right, instead in the game, white played king to e2, king e6. See, and now it's too late. So now if you take, black's king gets to d5, and that's a win. So white should probably run away. So you should probably play rook c2. Though after g5, he's going to be down a pawn and a rook ending. But down a pawn and a rook ending is a lot better than down a pawn and a king and pawn ending. So white played king e3, and here black should just trade. And again, king d5, same thing we've discussed, black will win. Okay, so instead black played rook a4, which is a mistake. And okay, various inaccuracies here. I mean, white should try to go active, but we'll just get to the interesting finish. Okay, so all of this, yeah, I mean, this is just a dead drawn position. Okay, but now we have another series of blunders. Okay, now here, if black just plays king f8 or king g8, it's a simple draw. Even without the a-pawn, this would be a draw. Black would just put the rook somewhere like, well, just give checks, basically. And whenever white attacks the g-pawn with his rook, the king comes back up. Rook c7 check, king f8 again. Easy draw. And with his rook, probably the simplest thing to do besides giving checks is to just take aim at the f4 pawn. All right, but instead black plays this, which is just a blunder. So white can win with rook to g7. So typical trick in rook endings. The only way to protect the pawn is with king f5, then check, and then rook f6 check, and this is a win. Instead, white played rook to c6 check, which is a blunder because black can just play king to f7 and reach the draw again. Instead, black played king f5, and this should be automatic. You should see the problem with this move. It's rook f6 mate. But white didn't see it. Played rook a6 check. Rook a3, king f2. Okay, and now, again, it's just a dead draw. Well, it's not a dead draw because the players managed to make it living. But it should be a dead draw. It should be a very easy draw. Rook a4. Okay, rook f6 is fine. All right, so anyway, nothing really happening here. This is still equal. Okay, lots of ways for this to be a draw. Now, I don't know if white was trying to win this, or what white's ambitions were. If all white wants to do is draw, he can just play king e2, bring the king to the queen side at this point. Okay, instead he plays rook here, rook a2, king e1, a3. Okay, and again, white could just bring the king over to the queen side, draw very easily. So we're just in time, but just in time is good enough. Okay, instead white played g6. Still a draw, but it's getting a little scarier. Rook a1 check. Okay, and now white can actually make an interesting try with king to f2. So after a2, rook a8, and now figure out what black to move should do in this position. Now, if there were no white g-pawn, rook to h1 would absolutely be the way to go, with the point that rook takes a2, rook h2 check, rook takes a2, and then if g7, rook a8. Black wins. However, rook a4 check, so letting the white king escape, king f5, g7, and now it's time for black to resign. Or at least, well, black is lost. Doesn't have to resign because you can get a queen versus rook ending, which can be tricky, but ultimately it's lost. So anyway, this would be a losing line for black. So instead of rook to h1, black should just play rook to b1. So g7, rook to b2 check. Okay, if king e1, then rook to g2. And if king to g1, then this little trick, rook to b8. Okay, rook takes a2. And now, okay, king f5 is simple. But not king to g5. Okay, so I hope in a position like this you never play a move like king to g5. Unless you're playing me. Because g8 queen, or you can make a rook, and then rook to g2 check would be a rather embarrassing finish. So, just king f5 and rook g8, king f6, rook g7, draw. Alright, so that's king f2. In the game, white played king to d2, which is a little bit riskier. So a2, and now what does white do? So now it's already getting a little bit dangerous, maybe a lot bit dangerous. So how should white hold this? So this is definitely a place where you'll have to stop the recording and think for a little bit. Well, the answer is this: rook a8, the only move, or rook f8 check and then rook to a8. It's really the only try. Okay, so now we at least stop the rook to d1 check threat. What happens on rook to g1? How does white survive this one? The answer? g7. So now if queen, we just take the queen, and on rook g7, not rook takes a2, but king c2. So we had to divert the rook from the back ranks. There's no a1 queen here, and now we're ready to take on a2 next move. So that draws. So a couple of neat little finesses there. In the game, white played g7, which is a losing move. Rook to d1 check, king c2, and now just a1 queen or rook to c1 check first, queen, and then queening wins. So for instance, a1 queen, check here. Let's say we check again here, queen, and white's king is just completely exposed, and there are lots of ways to mate. Here's just one of them. And now rook c3, queen b4, queen d4, and queen takes d5 mate. Okay, but lots and lots of ways to finish the job. That's just one. So black queening, the general rule of thumb, I mean, there are, of course, always going to be exceptions, but in a position like this, if you queen first, you're going to win. As long as, you know, if both kings are fairly exposed. Or think of it another way, whoever queens or whoever checks first when the queens are on the board will almost always win. So instead, though, black played the horrific rook to d2 check. Well, okay, it was a blitz game, so you know you can do any kind of crazy thing in blitz when you're running out of time. But this is just a terrible move. King takes d2, queen, rook f8, check, and queens. And okay, at the very best, I mean, black would still have a draw, but he doesn't. I mean, white's even winning this. But even if it was a draw, rook to d2 check would still be bad, since it gains nothing, gives away the rook, and in fact gives away a win. But in fact it's losing, but appropriately enough in this position. Okay, well actually, yeah, black makes another blunder here. He plays queen takes f3. Now, I'm calling it a blunder because while he's dead lost here, his opponent ran out of time in this position. So black should have kept the queens on the board and would probably have won on time. But again, you know, it's a blitz game. You're running out of time. You just... You know, it's all reaction. You don't get to think about these things. Okay. Anyway, very interesting game. Lots of errors, but some interesting points. Okay. Next game. All right. So this game, actually, I don't want to say too much about, but it was just basically a good game. So this is between the Riot and some anonymous player, and the Riot actually won a fairly nice game. You know, some errors from both sides certainly, but yeah, I think I'll just skip the game, but it was actually reasonably nice. I'll just show a couple of quick points from it. Okay, in this position, white made a mistake. So white should have played bishop takes d4, but played knight takes f6. And this is a mistake because if black had played queen takes f6 instead of rook takes f6, we would probably have a winning advantage. So takes, f4, d3, and black's trumps are the more significant ones here. So black would be winning in this position. Okay, after rook takes. Okay, rook takes d4 is another mistake. See if you can figure out why. Well, remember the old John Nunn, though again he didn't invent it, he got it from a friend of his, but his little acronym LPDO, loose pieces drop off. So the rook on d4 is hanging, the rook on a1 is hanging. Well, but what's threatening it? You'll see. If rook takes f2, the queen will be threatening it. So king f2, queen f6 check, and white can save one rook, but then the other one will fall, and black is winning here. So black missed it, played rook e to f8, rook to d2. Again, black missed the chance for rook takes f2. Here it would just be equal, but the point is rook f2, king f2. Well, rook takes f2, rook takes f2. All the exchanges, then queen f6 check, and queen takes a1. All right, so instead queen g5 happened. Okay, let's kind of move along here. White's just better at this point up a pawn. But I thought rook takes f3 was interesting. So see if you can figure out what should happen after rook takes f3. So a little puzzle here for you. Well, rook takes f3 is in fact, well, black is probably going to lose in the long run anyway, but there is a concrete refutation of rook takes f3. So the idea is something like this. So takes, and let's say white plays a move like queen to b1. So that after rook takes g3 and queen takes g3, you can play rook to g2, and the rook on d1 is protected in various variations. However, black has sufficient control over the dark squares, and white has insufficient, doesn't have enough ways to combat this. So it's going to be perpetual. So this is perpet, or if king h2, queen h6, and again perpetual. However, if white plays queen to b2, then after this, white has queen f2 and wins. So rook takes f3 is interesting, but ultimately it fails to save the game. So in the game, instead, black retreated the queen, and white went on to break through on the queen side and win about 13 moves later. Okay, so let's move on to the next game. Okay, so you have two from Krumov, and again, the interesting games. They're entertaining games, but I'll let you look at them yourselves. Okay, so next we have a game between Random Death and Hitchhiker, and Hitchhiker submitted it even though he lost, so kudos to him for doing so. Alright, so we have this slightly unusual approach, but notice that white is maintaining the option of returning to an open Sicilian with d4. So for that reason, I think black's next move is somewhat inaccurate. I don't really see the point to knight e7. Now, there are times where it's very good to develop the knight there. But, so when I say I don't really see the point, it's more a matter of move order. There's no real reason to play there right now. So after knight e7 castles, he played knight b to c6. Well, why not play knight to c6 first? And let's wait and see how white commits himself with respect to the d-pawn. If he goes for a closed Sicilian approach with something like d3, well then this knight e7, g6, bishop g7 approach followed by knight to d4 makes very good sense. But if he plays d4, we don't want the knight on e7, we want it on f6. So I would say it's much better to play this flexible way. So let's see. So let's say knight to c6. Okay, let's say white stays flexible with castling. Well, in the game, and it looks perfectly useful, black ended up playing a6. So let's do it now. All right, and now the choice is on white. Okay, again, if he plays g6, well, now, okay, still nothing at all wrong with knight f6, but it's reasonable to consider knight g to e7 here. This wouldn't be such a weird move. On the other hand, if he plays d4, then you should take, and play knight f6. And now we've transposed into a Sozin Sicilian. All right. So knight e7, I think, is not really such a great move. It's not losing, it's just an inaccuracy. I mean, because after this, now the knight on e7 is imperfect. Okay. So what does black do now? He could play this exchange of knights, And I think it's reasonable. I mean, it gives a playable game. The only thing that black has to be a little bit careful about is that here he no longer has any knights on the king side, so he has to make sure that his king side doesn't get in any trouble. But okay, played a6, and here white chose an interesting move, knight f3, just attempting to show that black has this superfluous knight on e7. Okay, so for that reason, I would probably play knight to g6 here, and just try to complete my development. And black's position looks pretty harmonious here. I mean, the knight on g6 is okay. It's certainly not a bad piece. And all of the rest of his guys find their ways to good squares. So I can play bishop b7, queen c7, rook c8, or rook to d8, bishop f6, the knight from g6, maybe at some point to e5. Just one way to proceed. I mean, there's quite a few, and black is doing well. All right, but b6 was a slightly peculiar move. b5 is a much nicer thing to achieve, and okay, maybe black has to be a little careful about his timing of it, but that would be the way to go. So here, if I had white, I would play a4 and try to show that this pawn on b6 is a weakness, at least something that black will always be a little bit tied down to. Okay, so instead bishop to e3, bishop e7, queen e2, queen c7. Okay, again, queen c7 is okay, not really necessary. And now rook to d8 I don't really like either. Okay, so I would again prefer knight to g6. I mean, we want to develop. We want to finish developing, get our king to safety, and then play b5 at some convenient moment. So rook to d8, okay, it's a little slow. Now here, okay, this is, for me, the most interesting moment of the game. And the question is, should black play b5 or not? So take your time. Try to work your way through the variations. See what you can come up with. Okay, well in the game, black played knight to g6, which is just a mistake, because white can just play bishop takes a6 and be a pawn up. And, okay, after this, it took quite a while before white finally did decide to take the pawn. So when rook to d2, black should play b5, but he plays bishop d7. White should take, he doesn't. Black should protect it and play b5, doesn't. Same thing. Okay, and now from here, it's actually kind of unclear. White should play queen to b5 and be a little bit better. This is a blunder. Black should play knight takes b2 and he's winning. Okay, instead he did this. And, okay, white's basically up a pawn for nothing here. There were still some inaccuracies, but white went on to win. But let's go back to the position here. This is very interesting. So b5 is a playable move. Now here white should play bishop to b3, keep some advantage, but it's basically a playable game. Black would play knight to g6, and the game goes on. But bishop takes b5 looks extremely dangerous. And here's the clever point. So a takes b5, knight takes b5. Now we want to keep the d6 pawn protected, so queen to b8. Okay, now bishop to b6. So we're threatening the rook, and we're threatening bishop c7 and knight to c7. So rook to d7 looks like the obvious move, but now bishop to c7 anyway. It's a strong move. And after rook takes c7, black loses everything. He loses his shirt here. So knight takes d6, and we check this way. King d7 wouldn't have made any difference. And we go back, and we take this one, we take the rook, and black is just devastated. So it looks like b5 is a blunder. However, after bishop to b6, black has a better move than rook to d7, and it's bishop to a6. Threatening the knight, threatening the bishop as well, and remember, he's up a piece for 2 pawns at the moment. So we'd have some continuation like this. Bishop takes d8, queen b5, takes, bishop e7. Now, best is to just take the bishop. And here we have a very interesting position. White has a rook and 2 pawns for 2 bishops. It's probably equal objectively, but these endings are much easier for black to play than for white to play. So my experience, and it's generally been on the pain side with the rook, has been, again, that it's very difficult to play such positions. And the bishops, once they get into their element, it can be just absolute demolition. So, practically speaking, black is better here. But it is playable for white. I mean, white's really not lost or anything. Anyway, that means that b5 is sound and should have been played. Okay, well, very interesting game. Let's move on to the next one. And, okay, yes, there's a game between Sengi and Ackerman. Quite an interesting little game. Both players are pretty good, so ratings over 2,000, at least. I don't know if it was online ratings or real chess, but anyway, good players. Really what I wanted to show, just wanted to show one main point. So there's some various interesting things later on in the game, and you can analyze them for yourself, but I wanted to show a little trick that occurred early in the game that both players missed, actually. Alright, so we have the following moves. And Sengi, who is white, played a3, and black, to prevent b4, played a5. Now, the question is, and just raising the question pretty much answers it, did black really stop b4? The answer is that he didn't. Simply b4, because a takes b4 is a blunder. A takes b4, and white wins with the double attack on the rook and the queen. So white is clearly better here. I mean, a5 proves to be an absolutely useless move, and white's queenside initiative and superior development and extra space give him a superior position. So there's an analogous trick in the Sokolsky, or the orangutan, or the Polish, or whatever you want to call it. The opening starts with 1b4. So there's this line c6, bishop b2, queen to b6. And at first sight, this looks pretty good for black. And it is a playable line. There's nothing wrong with the variation, but it's not quite as good as it might appear at first sight. So the idea is that after a3, black ramps up the pressure with a5. And here a move like c6 would just be ugly and really turn that bishop on b2 into a terrible piece. But white has a very nice little trick here. Very nice way of dealing with the threat of a takes b4. And the way to do it is to play c4. And after a takes b4, you play c5. So pretty nifty little trick. So if black tries to keep the pawn protected with a move like queen to b5, well, this is just no good on account of e3. And if queen takes c5, of course, we see the main point again. A takes b4, and white's just winning on the spot. Notice that queen takes b4, rook a8, queen b2 is no good because rook takes b8, and then the bishop is also in trouble too. So that's just dead lost for black. But, okay, as far as the mirthless variation go, black is okay if he just plays queen to c7. And we swap, maybe knight a6 and d6, and black is completely fine here. So the line is playable, but just be aware of that little trap. Okay, so on to the next game. Actually, let me see, was there one thing I wanted to discuss later on in the game? Yeah, just one neat variation here. Okay, so we got to this position. Material is even, but white obviously has a dominating position. And the game finished like this. Queen b6, knight e8 check, king h6, rook to d4, threatening rook h4 mate, g5, and now a very good move, rook to b4. So he protects the bishop with gain of time. And after knight c6, swapped, knight takes f6, and obviously black's position is collapsing. After knight to b3, knight to g4, check, king h5, queen g7 is quite nice. There's no good defense to the threat of queen h6 mate. Okay, so it was a nice finish. Just wanted to show some cute tactics here. If black plays bishop to d7 instead. Now the first thing is to note is that white doesn't have any good way of exploiting this opposition of the queens here on the c file. For instance, if knight takes b7, this is just a blunder because queen takes, and then queen takes b5. But knight to g5, throwing another piece into the attack, works out very nicely. So now the threat is, well, there's a lot of threats. Bishop takes d7 is one of them. And if black plays bishop takes b5, then white has two strong moves here. So one is knight takes b5 with the idea of meeting queen c6 with queen takes c5. Okay, so now if black plays queen takes c5, white wins with knight takes e6 check and then knight takes c5, emerging a piece and a pawn ahead. And if f takes g5, then we just trade queens and play knight to c7. And we either win this exchange or the exchange this way. So white wins. Okay. Another way to win after bishop takes b5 is just with queen takes c5. So this little trick, and we just come out a pawn ahead with the dominating position. Okay, so anyway, a nice finish by Sengi. There were some mistakes earlier, some places where he could have won. Well, maybe one move really one error of some significance. But other than that, nothing too serious. Anyway, not a bad game at all, and you might want to take a closer look at it later. Okay, and then finally we have a game between CH and Joel G. And he basically wants to know about the position after on his 10th move. So he had black, and he's in very good shape. Okay, here white should play knight to e5, but he plays d4, which is bad. Takes. And really the question was, should black play c4, trying to lock this bishop on c2 in a vault where it'll never be accessed ever again, or just play c takes d4 and grab the pawn. And okay, I think like the question in the earlier game, which is better? Should you take the queen for the two rooks, or just grab the pawn and trade queens? Here too, it's some extent a matter of taste. The thing to say in favor of c takes d4, not that it's better than c4, but something that makes it a viable option, is the fact that even without the pawn on c4, white's bishop is still kind of sickly thanks to this mighty pawn on d5 helping to shut it in. So I think black is probably winning here too. And for that matter, black could even play things like just castling and go for the initiative, or play knight to c6. Maybe even queen to d7, though this isn't as good. But yeah, I mean, I like c4. I like c4 quite a lot. But I think both approaches are perfectly good. And after c4, I mean, white might be able slowly but surely to play c3 and knight to d2 and bishop to b1, and maybe the bishop can come out and live. So it's maybe not the end of the world, but it's a tough position. And he certainly can't play b3 to try to break out this way. I mean, this would be kind of the dream scenario for black, where the bishop on a2 is just comically bad at this point. Of course, black is winning. So I would say either is good. It's just a matter of whether you want more control or to have more of a fluid position. So c takes d4, keep some control. Certainly the bishop is still bad, and you've got this extra pawn, and you are better, I think, set up for attacking possibilities. But c4 is very good too. So really, it's just an embarrassment of riches. The only thing to watch out for in positions like that is not to go crazy and do something foolish because you're suffering from the options. So don't, if it's an over-the-board game, don't run out of time trying to figure out which is better. At some point, just figure out which one position you like better, which seems more pleasing to you, and go with it. Or flip a coin if you've got to, but just make a decision. So both routes are good. Okay, so that concludes this show. We're basically caught up on the games, although, as I said, I may look at the Johannesson game later on. Perhaps it'll get its own show. And but for now, we're caught up. So next time, I think I'll present one of my games, or part of one of my games, from the tournament in Chicago last week. And until then, I'll maybe see you on my blog, chessmind.powerblogs.com. Take a look there. And other than that, I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.